Welcome to the Trinity Podcast. My name is Joel Milligan, and I am your host for today. Right here at Trinity, we want to help everyday people discover an extraordinary life with God. And my guests on the podcast this morning are Daniel Riddick, Tommy Carr, and Daniel Warren. Good to have you guys back again.
Great to be here.
On the podcast. And we're going to get into our topic of God encounters. That's what we're talking about in the series that we're studying at our church. But I thought I would start with this. You all are public speakers. And if you do any research about public speaking, there are many people that would rather do anything else than stand up on stage and speak publicly. But obviously God has given you the gift of teaching, and it's something that comes very naturally for you, and he uses those gifts. But I'm always interested, I get to speak on stage in front of teenagers weekly, probably the most critical or constructive group of people that you can speak in front of maybe. But what is your most embarrassing moment public speaking on stage? I'll give you mine, and then I want to go around the horn here and get yours, because I think our listeners and our viewers, this is quality material here. They want to hear this. So I was early on in youth ministry, and I was speaking on a Wednesday night tour youth group, and I was teaching on this idea around Jesus coming to earth as a baby. It was around Christmas time. And I was trying to drive home this point of how, Jesus came to earth, and God pictured that, God is for everyone, not just the rich, but also for the poor. And in fact, on the whole spectrum, I talked about how the angels announced the birth of Jesus to the shepherds. And I was trying to illustrate a point to the teenagers that being a shepherd back then, it was not a glamorous job. It was something that was very difficult. It was something that was hard. You may not have got a lot of money for it, but Jesus chose, God chose to announce his son coming. Anyways, so I was trying to drive home the point that having the job of a shepherd was not a very glamorous job. And I related that job to a job that they would understand that would probably, and I referred to like a fast food chain or whatever. And I was trying to give them the picture that this kind of how the shepherds were. Little did I know, one of the teenagers that was listening had just got a job at that particular fast food chain that I mentioned. And the mom called me the next day upset because her teenager went out and quit his job at that fast food restaurant the next day because of the embarrassment that I put on him by referring. I felt so terrible. I mean, what do I say? I'm so sorry. I should have never. So I'm sorry about making you quit your job. That was an embarrassing kind of after moment for me. So anyways, all right. What's yours, Daniel?
I thought about this, two things. One, we had a great idea, and it was a really great illustration, but a number of years ago, we brought a live lamb out on stage. We were talking about Jesus, kind of along the same lines, the shepherd, the sheep. We brought a live lamb on stage, and for the first, 2 minutes, it was incredible. Of course, everybody's just dialed in. There's this lamb on stage. I mean, it's a serious kind of moment too, like really we're landing the plane here, and there's this lamb here. And then I'm telling you, this thing, I won't go into too much graphic detail, but begins to unload all over the stage, walking, and it's just poor. I mean,
as you're speaking,
and there was no coming. Like the sermon was done. Somebody had to come out and scoop it all up and sweep it up. There was a smell. I mean, like. It was bad. It was over. I'll tell you one other thing. A couple years ago.
Daniel has multiple. I like it.
I'm ready.
A couple years ago. This is actually going back a decade now. Tom and I were on a Sunday morning or Sunday night or something like that, unveiling kind of some new things we were doing, upgrades in the church and all this kind of stuff. It's really encouraging. And so what I should have said was we had purchased a new sound system for student ministry, and we had purchased new vans for our deaf ministry.
I actually remember this.
And I mean, I'm just going through the list, and I just got my wires crossed, and I went on about this new sound system we were purchasing for the deaf ministry. And I could tell everybody out there is looking at me like, What are you talking about? And hey, I sold it though. I went all the way in on it, and then Tommy was very quick afterwards.
Easy.
To let me know. Yeah,
Seat of the scornful. I'm always in it.
Tommy's always very
Always
quick
very quick.
to point those things out.
Tommy?
So the one I can think of that I can repeat on air. That's the thing you
that's
have
a
to.
qualifier.
Listen, we've all
there.
said things that we probably can't say.
Last Sunday, I was just thinking about. I'm not repeating what I said last Sunday. So, which a few people in the sound department picked up on it back in the back, and I said I don't think I said that, but they said I did. But if you don't know about it, then everybody go back and listen to the message. You go, did he really?
It is last
That was
Sunday.
clickbait to
That
get
was
our
clickbait
viewership
to get
up
back
on
on the
last.
viewership. But I said something during the reading of scripture that people in the back said I said something that I don't think I did. But anyway, so I pride myself on being kind of a science guy. I grew up pre-med, and so really love anatomy, physiology, medical stuff, love medical shows, love reading medical journals. This is part of who I am. But I was teaching on prayer, and boy, it wasn't on this stage, but it was on the couple stage, probably 100, 200 people in there. And I just said, part of the message, I said, we ought to be given to prayer. We ought to pray for those that are around us that have needs. Like when medical needs come up in people in our classes' lives, we ought to really seek God's face and pray. I said, just like, and I named one of the guys in the class. I said, this week he suffered a decapitation, and he's in the hospital recovering. And everybody just started looking at me. And what had happened, he'd had part of his hand chopped off, and I turned it into a decapitation. And he was
Well, that's a hard one to recover
That's
from.
a hard one to recover from. But after the class, they went, you just decapitated Robert. So I'm like, so it happens. If you speak long enough publicly, it's going to happen.
Yeah, mine was on a Mother's Day. We have this sort of traditional blessing.
This is one of the greatest ones ever.
We pray over the moms, and it goes through moms who in this season they have young kids, maybe they have adult children.
It's very heartfelt.
They're
and emotional.
spiritual moms,
It is.
and really, I mean, it's this heavy but very blessing oriented aspect of it. And on the screen, as I was reading, we want to remember those moms who are struggling with infertility.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing.
Yeah.
We're always sensitive to that around
Yeah.
Mother's Day. But instead of infertility, I said to those moms who are struggling and walking through the valley of infidelity.
It really,
And I kept going.
It really killed the moment.
Yeah, and everybody's like, "What did he just say?" And I'm trying to figure out what did I just say? I'm trying to keep talking while my brain's doing a replay, and all of a sudden I realize what I said, and I'm like, "Oh." And I it was done for me.
You're
it was
done.
done for everybody in the
that's it.
room. So we just paused, said, "Yes, I said that.
Yep.
Here's what I meant to say. Let's move forward." And we got through it. But
It's
it was
going to happen. Yeah.
Well, I think some of your sons actually have that on they can find it on their phone within 5 seconds.
Yeah.
They have it saved on their phones.
They also have videos of each other in sporting events. So when those are happening, we all pull out the embarrassing videos
Yes.
of.
Yeah.
It's what makes our bond great as Warren men.
Well, listen, I appreciate you all being public speakers and sharing on stage. It's not easy. As you can tell, there are sometimes we say things we don't mean to say or whatever, but that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. I just thought it'd be really good to give a little, personal insight into the life of a pastor. So we are talking about God encounters and experiencing the presence of God. And last week we talked a lot about what that is, what that isn't. We kind of set up basically a foundation for what we're going to be talking about. We're looking at different people in the Old Testament who experienced God, whether through theophanies, Christophanies, and talked about Abraham. But now we're looking at the life of Jacob. And there are many people listening or watching that you know a lot about the life of Jacob and you've heard a lot about his story, or maybe this is maybe a new story for you. So just to give a rundown of kind of where Jacob was at, as we read his story and we look in Genesis 32, one of the first things we realize about him is that he is a trickster. Mm-hmm. He is a master manipulator, even a heel grabber at the beginning of his life. So that's where I want to start. Jacob was a master manipulator, and we read about him stealing a birthright and blessing. But if we're going to relate this story that we've been talking about to our own personal lives, Tommy, I'll start with you. What is the danger in us manipulating or working or manufacturing blessings in our life? Because I feel like that's what Jacob was doing. He was trying to take all of these things and apply them to himself, and, oh, God didn't give me this, so I'm going to just figure out a way to get it for myself. What are ways that we do that in our own life, and what's the danger in us being master manipulators of basically creating blessings in life?
Yeah, so we all want to sometimes move the chess pieces on our own life's chessboard. And I think you see in Jacob especially, so he's like, well, I know Esau was the firstborn, but even coming out, he's called the heel grabber. His hand was latched onto his, and he's this usurper. He wants to try to move his own chess pieces. So it comes to the birthright, and he basically says, I'm going to go try to sell it and get it. It's not mine rightfully. So I want to get the double portion of inheritance. I want to get that priest. I want to get the lineage. Doesn't happen, but he's still trying to get it. And finally he gets it from his dad. He gets that blessing put upon him. Well, his brother's so mad, he's going to chase him. So here goes Jacob running toward Laban, a family member, and he sees Rachel, and he runs into a more manipulative person than him.
Yeah.
Who manipulates him into 7 years of work for the wrong girl. And then he has to work another 7 years to get the right girl. And so here's what happens when you start manipulating pieces. You become the God of your own life, rather than saying, God, I want you to control the chess pieces of my life. Often it happens younger ages when you're trying to find that girl, and you're trying to date, and you're trying to make sure things work, and then you try to manipulate your career, and then you try to manipulate friends, and it will wear you out. And you'll find out that I want God's best for me, not what I can generate by my manipulation. I think that's what we find when we get to Genesis 32. He finally runs into Christophany, Jesus Christ, and he says, okay, this is what I've been looking for my whole life. I can't manipulate this. I just need this to bless my life. So I think everybody that has done that, and we've all done it. If you're listening to this, everybody sit at the table, you've manipulated the chess pieces on the board of your life, and that'll result in less than God's blessings in your life.
You know, what brings us, or what brought Jacob to this situation, was he finally came face to face with a situation he had no control over. I think the huge reality, we don't like to, you know, it's I'm going to say it out loud for all of us. We have control issues. Like in a...
You might, but I don't. No, I'm just kidding.
No, we have control issues.
No.
I want to make that very clear.
Yeah.
I'm not going to let you put words in my mouth.
Yes, yeah, don't.
And, no, maybe I'm just confessing right now. I have control issues.
I do too.
And so we get to what Tommy just said, our career, our relationships, our money, and we think, hey, the only way that this is going to work out in my favor, you know, going to work out to get the blessing, is if I do anything by any means necessary, even when it crosses the line, like in Jacob's case, and it becomes manipulative and wrong and hurtful and painful. I mean, literally, you know, you look back on his story, you know, it's like he hurt relationships, his brother being a key one in his life, so that he could orchestrate things in his favor. Finally, he comes to this realization that I've got a circumstance that is so far outside of my control, and I'm about to, you know, reap what I have sown. He has that kind of, you know, what we like to call a come to Jesus moment in the best way. And he realizes the only place that I'm going to get the blessing that I've really worked my whole life to try to, and I've manipulated everybody in my life to get the blessing. The only place I'm going to get the blessing is from God himself. And for the first time, he wrestles in the right way. And instead of trying to manipulate his parents, instead of trying to manipulate his brother, instead of trying to manipulate his family and his wife and all that, all of a sudden he says, God, I'm not going to let go. And he begins to wrestle in a right, holy, spiritual way for the one who actually can give him the very thing he's been, you know, striving his whole life for.
That's a great point. And I think, you know, when you think about this idea of us trying to control things, Daniel, when we try to control things, does it actually make things further out of control? Like, is there collateral damage of people in our lives that get hurt because we tried so hard to manipulate a situation? In the story of Jacob, we see it.
Yeah, I think for my experience has been when I become so ambitious and goal-oriented that I pursue my goal no matter the cost, what I can get is what I think is best. Mm-hmm. And that rarely is best, because I don't understand. I'm not God. I don't understand all those unintended consequences. Yeah. And I think there is this real tension. I think especially for leaders and maybe our listeners who are goal-oriented people, they're high achievers. Well, I set my mind on a goal and I'm going to get it no matter what. Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot of things that fall under no matter what.
Yeah.
But I don't think God wants us to just be passive, submitting to the fates, if you will.
Yeah.
What is that tension? Where does, it's that work like it depends on you, pray like it believes it depends on God. How do you manage that tension? I think that is the hard thing, in where it really our faith meets real life is how do we yield control to God? And I think that is where Jacob is manipulating, but he gets to this point and he says, God, you promised me this, and I'm just going to hold on to you until you bless me. Mm-hmm. And I think he didn't say, I'm going to keep working until I get what I want and what I think the blessing is. I'm going to hold on to you. And that was the crossing point. That's when God says, I'm going to change your identity. I'm going to change your direction, and you're going to be blessed and highly favored.
Yeah. And I would like to dig into probably Jacob's mind a little bit too, because I think there's a little bit of that. You think, hey, if I get this in my life, this will complete me. This will bless me. This is what I need. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that's what he did when he saw the birthright. He's like, I need that. And I'll do whatever I need to get that. And I think he did the same thing when he saw Rachel. He's like, hey, if I have that, look how beautiful she is. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what I need. And I think what happens if we manipulate our way into places and then it gets hard in that place, we'll doubt why we're at that place. Yeah. Like if you manipulate your way into a job and then you get in the job and you go, is this what really God wanted me to do? I think when God leads us into the place, we can rest on his word. Yeah. If we manipulate in, we're on our own strength. And that is a place of doubt and frustration.
I think that's that promise in the Psalms, delight yourself in the Lord and he'll give you the desires of your heart. Right. Yeah. And Junior Hill was here. I can remember 20 years ago, and he made the comment, if you put your desires if you delight in your desires, if you put your desires before God, you'll find no delight in your desires. So we have to focus on God, and then he gives us the desires of our heart. Yeah. But if I'm just pursuing what I desire, then there'll be no delight in it when I get it, and it's empty, and I got what I wanted, but it did not satisfy. And I think that's what Jacob had done his whole life up until this point.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a practical byproduct too to that kind of tendency to try to control or manipulate everything in our life. There is a reality which we kind of don't, I think, acknowledge as much as we should, which is sometimes we can control things. Like we actually can manipulate. I mean, Jacob did it. He got the birthright. Right. He got the girl. It actually, he got what he wanted. The what goes oftentimes unseen, especially over time, is kind of the toll and the effect that it takes on us. And it's like, hey, I might be able to manipulate a circumstance to get the outcome I'm looking for. I might be able to control everything or attempt to control everything in my life. And what happens is, and I've found myself in this place so many times, you wake up one day and you are carrying a weight that you were never intended to bear. And it's not that you didn't get what you wanted. It's the weight of what came with that and the way you went about it. We're stressed out. We're buried. And I mean, and this looks in real practical ways. We're buried in debt financially. We're in like you just said, we're in the job and we hate it. And, it's like all of a sudden we get what we wanted, but the way we went about it or the place we got to, and we wake up and go, wow, this is not what I thought it was going to be. And we're buried under the weight of our own control. And it can take a toll on you, especially over time, over time.
So C.S. Lewis, this is a quote for Pastor because he loves C.S. Lewis.
Yes, he does.
Said this: God whispers to us in our pleasure and shouts to us in our pain. So we see as Jacob is wrestling here with God, there's a moment of weakness in Jacob where God knocks him off of his feet. He maims him for the rest of his life. And in that moment, obviously, Jacob is realizing, I can't control this situation. I am weak. So let's look at that in maybe your own personal lives, ministry lives. What are some areas where you have had that realization of your own weakness or insufficiency to control or to handle a situation, and how that resulted in you just obviously humbly surrendering to God because I am too weak to control this situation? Are there examples that you can share that you've experienced?
I have one that comes to mind for me. I think there's probably multiple that I could get into, some probably more personal than I want to share.
Please do.
I tend to. But I think I'm always reminded of the Apostle Paul. He's asked the Lord 3 times to remove this messenger of Satan. And, what is that messenger of Satan, that thorn in the flesh? Well, the word messenger is the word that's translated angel over and over again. Yeah. So it was a demonic oppression. What we don't know. But God says, no, I'm not going to, because my strength is made perfect in your weakness. And I am all you need. And I think that for me, I can remember I was in Togo several years ago in West Africa with J.J. Alderman, our partner, and I was up in the mountain village of Padape, and I was having to speak, and I'd never really spoken through a translator. And we're up in this small farming village up in the mountains, and I'm having to preach that morning, and they were going to translate from English into French and from French into the tribal dialect there in that region. And I can remember walking, the guys all got in the truck and went ahead, and I said, I'm just going to walk through the village to the church. And I can remember walking, going, God, I don't know how to do this. I don't know these people. I don't know their culture. I don't know what stories and how to illustrate this. Yeah, I can't do this without you. And I can remember what the building looked like I was standing by. And God said, that's no less true when you're home in the United States. You just don't realize that you can't do this without me. Right. Yeah. And I was like, that is probably very true. And really, he said, you are weaker than you realize, and you always need me. And for me, that was that moment where, not that I don't, it's not that since then I haven't gotten up and probably tried to teach just in my own self, but it is a reminder. And usually Sundays I spend time God confessing that it was just as true then. It's a reminder. That's a pivotal moment for me to look back and see, okay, God, you spoke to me and taught me a truth about myself and you in that moment, and I can never forget that lesson, or else I will have no power in ministry.
I feel like I'm reminded, and I mean this in the most serious way, I'm reminded about my weakness every day, because I come home and I have 2 kids, and parenting is incredibly difficult. I mean, it's just like whatever you think it was going to be, and it's in the issue. I mean, it stretches you, challenges you. You realize you don't have the answers. All of a sudden, you can't control the outcomes in every part of their life. And it's like if you ever, I mean, really, if you ever want to be reminded of your weaknesses, become a mom or a dad, because I mean, your kids will. My kids are brutally honest with me too, which I love. I mean, it's all in love most of the time, but it's like, you come home. I come home literally, on a Sunday afternoon, and boy, we've had a big day at church, whatever's happened, and I'm like, my son sits on the front row, and literally this Sunday, Lainey is in the services now. I said, hey, what'd you guys think? How's the sermon? Pretty good, and I mean, both of them, you went too long. That's their whole thing.
Did you call them the messengers of Satan?
It's just like, and again, I mean, they're just like, and they're not even like trying to soften it. They're just like, you went too long. That was their whole takeaway from the day. And I'm just reminded, like, it's okay that I don't have every answer, that I'm not perfect, but I'm telling you, those are the kinds of, I think, everyday kind of realities of life that remind us that we don't have the answers, and that should, in a right way, our weaknesses should point us to either remember or look, towards the Lord for the strength in what we clearly don't have control over.
Yeah, I think mine's probably a little more personal than, I mean, these are both personal, but this is probably a little deeper. So I would have said saved at age 5, so secure in my salvation, baptized at 18, got the girl of my dreams, married the girl of my dreams that I would have not wanted to marry anybody else in the world, had the career I wanted, doing well financially, teaching Sunday school, being blessed of the Lord, and had a family that I would have just said it's the greatest family that ever walked on the planet, both sides. My family, mom and dad couldn't have done better. Rhoda's family couldn't have done better. April 23rd, 2003, my dad passes away of a brain aneurysm. Mm-hmm. And that was a wrestling with God moment. Yeah. Like, I've done everything you said to do. I have followed your commands. I've got your spirit within me, and you would do this to me. Mm. And I know that's a terrible theological position to take, but when you build your life a lot of times on your own decisions, so I had the blessing of my wife, I had the blessing of my family, I had the blessing of a career, I had the blessing of finances, I had the blessing, and I missed the point that God was my ultimate blessing. And in an old red chair in my living room, I did this. It was what A.W. Tozer says, following hard after God. It's like Rhoda's words wouldn't suffice. I had my family calling me. I had friends stopping by. You came to the hospital. I mean, friends came and visited me, and here's what I wanted to say: all y'all get away from me.
Yeah.
Like, you don't understand. And I mean, even this dramatically, Tom came up to the hospital and he goes, "Man, I'm sorry." I'm like, "You don't understand. You still got both of your parents." And I don't want to say bitter, that's not the right word, but I wrestled with God that night over, I've done everything. And I think that was a real moment of, without me, you can do nothing. I am your shield and your ultimate reward. And life will never stop. We're going to die. Family members are going to die. Sicknesses are going to happen. And you need to come with grips that you're not in control of this. I am.
Tommy, I remember that personally, and it's kind of unique here. I know all three of us have lost our dads early. And I remember my dad died from leukemia. And, you know, we were out of town for one weekend. And finally I told Jen, I said, well, I mean, I guess I got to go. I'm the pastor. I'm preaching on the next Sunday. I said, I guess I have to go back to church. And one of the most, just being right there where like you were, people coming into the thing I wanted to do least was I wanted to go to church on that Sunday. And I had to preach a message. And it was just because I knew I was going to have, and boy, everybody loved, and I'm thankful for the love that, you know, it's like, I'm going to have 100 conversations about people telling me, and it's like, I don't have anything to say to them right
That's
now.
it.
You know, I don't have good answers about this. You know, I live here. My mom lives over there. She's alone. I've got a really young sister, which is a funny story. But, you know, it's like I've got a 10-year-old sister, and she's going to grow up, unlike me and my other sister, without a dad. And it's like, I know exactly what you're saying. And it's a gut punch. And you're really just like, you know, everything, you know, and then I got to go up and put a smile on my face and put a microphone on. And, man.
Yeah, I said it 2 weeks ago. Unless you learn in those moments to hide your life in the unshakable God, your life will always be shakeable. There will always be massive anxiety. There will also be massive hits that can come to your life to where you have to finally realize, I'm just going to hide myself inside of that which is unshakable. And then it's easy to go, hey, it's appointed a man wants to die, and I'll see my dad for the rest of eternity. And you have to, in those moments where you realize there's no control, hide yourself in that which is unshakable. I think that's a critical point in people's faith journey. I could have turned and said, I'm done with this. And I think people have done that.
It either pushes you away to God or pushes you into it.
So here are these God encounters we're talking about. These are those moments in these people's lives. I think Jacob could have said, I'm not wrestling, I'm running. My brother's going to kill me. I've manipulated my way through life. I don't care about the God of Abraham, Isaac. I'm not going to be the God of Jacob. And I think those are critical moments in people's faith journeys.
And that's where we see it in Genesis 32 in verse 9. He says, God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, you said to me, return to my country and to your kindred that I may do you good. And you said, I will do you good and make your offspring. So I'm being obedient. And what is going on? And Esau is over there across that river.
In the struggle, he said, I am not going to let go.
Until you bless me, I'm not letting go.
And that is actually when that veil of the next level of knowledge of Christ comes. I think it's what Apostle Paul's talking about, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection. Well, that's easy. I mean, I hate to say that's easy, but that's exciting. And the fellowship of his suffering.
And everybody just pauses before
Nobody
they get
wants
to the
that.
suffering part.
So you mean to know really him, I am going to have to suffer? Yes, and greatly. One great writer said, you can't be used greatly of God unless you've been suffered greatly. Like, great suffering allows you to really minister greatly. So
in this world, you'll have trouble. But take heart, I've overcome the world.
So that's what I'm seeing with these God encounters. I mean, we had 2 weeks ago, just when I say the altar was full, the altar was full. Like, people were down front. We had pastors praying over them. I had one gentleman, I remember, he's got a child in a wheelchair who's really struggling physically. And he was just weeping. And as I was praying, he was just shouting the same word over and over, Abba, Abba, Abba. And I was sitting there going, here's a guy he said, we need a God encounter in our life. That's what we're talking about in this series. And I think that's what's so powerful. When you come to realize I'm not in control, my parents could die, my finances could crash. I may not get the girl of my dreams. I may not have the job and the career, but it's okay because he is my shield and my exceeding great reward.
So Jacob had that I will not let go moment. Why are those type of moments so important? Just that perseverance as Jacob knew what he had, he did not want to let go of, is that presence and that encounter with God. Why is that so important for us as believers to have those, to go through difficulty, but then to have those moments of, I'm not going to let go of you while I'm wrestling with you?
I think we had a conversation before this with our sermon prep team that we do every week. And I do think there's a part of what it looks like to walk with God and journey with God and seek the presence of God like we're talking about. And this helps paint a different dynamic to that picture. Sometimes it is, it is a spiritual mountaintop experience where we're close to God and we're walking with Him, and boy, things are just, and that's awesome. And then, boy, if you're in that season, enjoy it and lean into it. And then sometimes, though, and this is why God's Word is so helpful, because it gives us the full picture. Sometimes that experience is more like a wrestling match, and it's a struggle, and it's something you have to grapple with, literally, and fight for, because, and I think what you see here, because of the value. I mean, the transformative moment in Jacob's life is somehow he came to the awareness that the defining thing in his life was that he held on to the Lord. I mean, that was it. Everything else, but he knew that he was the one, and he was not going to let go. And I mean, we don't like to talk about it because everybody likes the spiritual mountaintop moment. Sure. But sometimes we're at that place, and it's like, hey, I feel nothing. It's not good. Circumstances are terrible. All I have is God, and I'm not going to let go. All I have is the Lord. I will not let go until I hear from Him, until I see Him work, until I see Him move. And that, as much as a part of what it means to follow after God, walk with Him and journey with Him, as it is also to experience those kind of spiritual high moments. And
So related to that, God begins to let Jacob win, if we could put it that way. I think of when, I wrestled my kids when they were younger. There were times I would, kind of let them win or whatever, but God, in a sense, becomes weak so that Jacob could become strong. What is the importance of that? And why did that need to take place? God became weak so that Jacob could win in this situation, in this wrestling match. What is the importance of that?
This is one of those great questions. We don't have clear answer.
Yeah.
As we were talking about this morning, one writer was in this passage talked about the idea that to the nation of Israel, they had seen Jacob wrestle with man and win. And here they had wrestled with God, survived and prevailed. And if they could stand with God, and then they can overcome anything. And this idea, so I think in the gospel, we see God becoming weak. Man kills God. And when God becomes weak, we enjoy the benefits of life through the gospel because of the sacrifice of Jesus. And there's part of that when God, instead of becoming in as He could as the righteous judge of the world, says, hey, I'm going to be gracious. And in a honor, shame, or power, fear culture, weakness, mercy is weakness. And you get taken advantage of. It shows your weakness, and we can't do that. It's going to show they're weak. They're not going to fear you anymore. You're going to lose power. You're going to lose influence. And God says, "Hey, I will become weak, so that you can have life." And I think that is just part of God's reaction, His relationship with us. We see it at the garden. We see it with Abraham. We see it with Jacob. We see it with Moses. Over and over again, God becomes weak. He's not this God in the heavens shooting lightning bolts and inaccessible. But He comes with us as that Father who runs after us. And I think that's a big part of it.
I think the human element makes me laugh every time I read the story. Like, I don't even know if, when I read through it, I just kind of start giggling. Because it's like, here's Jacob, and if you had his perspective, he's like, man, I wrestled with the Lord, and then I prevailed. It's almost like you said, your kids come in. Like, I've got a small 2 grandsons, having 2 more granddaughters soon, but 2 grandsons. And you'll hear Judah, he'll come in and he'll tell, hey, Nana, I tackled Papa. And I'm like, okay. And he'll go, I held on to him and he couldn't even move. And I think the human side of that is, I'm like, I'm fine with you thinking that, but I'm absolutely sovereign in this relationship. And I think when you get to the other side, like your dad passing away, we think we've been clinging to him the whole time. And that's the dynamic of the relationship. The truth is he's been holding us the whole time. And his that are his know when you get to the other side, without him, we had no strength to cling to him.
Yeah.
So in this battle, here's Jacob, man, I fought with the Lord, and the Lord is so gracious. He touches him on the hollow of his thigh and just makes him not be able to walk. And for the rest of his life, he remembers it. So I'd say he carried a very outward sign of that. We all carry scars, but on the other side, it's like Mark Hall, y'all know I love Casting Crowns, right? He goes, it's not that I'm holding on to you, you're holding on to me. I think that's the power of it.
So I love that story, and I think of as we look back at this story, there are some writers that say, after he wrestled with God and prevailed, he had an identity change. That the reason for this whole story was the name change from Jacob, this trickster, to Israel, which means not Jacob fighting, it means God fights.
Right.
And identity is a huge buzzword in our culture. What can we take from this related to our own identities? Why was it important for Jacob's identity to change in this story and how that pushed him forward? And then as we all wrestle with identity, whether it's through possessions, people wrestle with the identity of whether it's gender, people wrestle with identity of who they were supposed to be. Why is it important that we know where identity comes from? And why was it important in the life of Jacob in this story?
He spent his whole life up until this point, literally, a couple of things: being who people told him he always was. In other words, he was named Jacob before he had done anything. He came out, he was holding his brother's heel, and it's like, hey, that's you. And then he became the names he had been given. And he lived that out. And then I think you see it actually in his whole life. It's like in his relationship with Esau, again, it's like clearly there was a dynamic there, and the scripture talks about it. Isaac and Esau had this unique relationship, and it was built around all of these kind of real, what we might describe as these kind of macho masculine realities. He was a hunter and all this kind of stuff. And you can see in the dynamic that he has with his earthly father, Isaac, he goes, well, if I'm going to get his love, apparently I've got to become something else. And so what he does is he puts the fur on. Like he literally, I'm going to become Esau because that's the way I'm going to get love. And then that just kind of continues through his whole life. He's going to work the situation and be whatever he needs to be in order to get the outcome. And his name is this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. Hey, I'm going to be the one that's manipulating. I'm going to be the one that is the trickster, and that's going to work it out. And he finally and rightly comes to this place where he realizes, I don't have to be this thing for anyone or anything, because God is the one who's going to fight for me. God is the one who's going to do this. God is the one who's going to bless. And God rightly, and this is, boy, you want to talk about just powerful. God gives him a new name. Hey, no longer are you going to be this thing that people have called you your whole life. I'm going to give you a new name, and your name is now found not in who you are, but it's in who I am, not in what you can do, but in what I've done for you. And it's good.
That'll preach.
It's good.
Yeah, it's really good. I think it's...
Yeah, I'm ready to go right now.
Yeah, I know. Aren't you ready? So it's like, you think about him. So it's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So your grandfather's Abraham. Little pressure there, maybe.
Yeah.
Right. So God's got a covenant with him. He's appeared to him in a vision, a dual theophany. Two things pass through the animals. That's your grandfather. Well, then your dad's Isaac, he was almost
the
killed.
Miracle child.
He's the miracle child,
right.
And he was also almost sacrificed, but God provided himself a lamb. And so a lamb. So here you got Jacob going, I don't have my own God story. Like, it's great to be the descendant of Abraham and Isaac. You do not get your true identity until you have a face-to-face encounter with Jesus. That is where your identity comes from. Yeah. He walked away from there having gathered his identity from a face-to-face encounter with Jesus Christ. I know who my dad is, I know who my grandfather is, but I am identified as a child of God, and he is my ultimate identity.
Yeah, and that divorced him from his past and gave him his own identity.
That's it.
It also divorced it from his own action. Because I think some of us have those legacies of faith that we have to. My kids can't inherit my faith; they have to experience it. But then and sometimes we get to the point where we look at our life and we're like, man, I've created this reputation, and how do I undo what I've done? And I think we experience it. We teach people every week who they have things that they've done, and their identity is this thing they did, this place they grew up. They've been called by parents, by spouses, by whatever, and their identity is wrapped up on what people have called them their whole life.
And I think he realized he could not live in Abraham's encounter, and he couldn't live in Isaac's encounter.
But
he wanted his own encounter.
But when God shows up, he can give us a new name.
That's it.
And when we walk through that encounter with God, he says, I don't care who your ancestors were. I don't care what your story is, what your life is. I can overcome anything you've done. I can erase your manipulative behavior. I can erase all of this when you have that encounter with me. Yeah.
Do you all struggle with identity? You're very public people. A lot of people hear all of your personal stories, but a lot of people know you. Is identity a struggle for you, maybe in the position that you're in, the ministry that you do? Is it a struggle, or is it something that, I conquered that a while ago, and it's not something that I really struggle with anymore?
Yeah, I beat it. Conquered it.
Next.
No.
I'm waiting for the and.
I think it's a struggle for all of us. I don't think, I think I appreciate your question. I don't think we struggle with it uniquely. There may be uniquenesses to our experience, but I don't think we struggle with it just like everybody else does. And a lot of us, we've kind of assumed some kind of alternative description of who we are. And I'm going to be the best business person. I'm going to be super dad. I'm going to be super mom. I'm going to be whatever, fill in the blank. We do, I think, in our vocation, we're pastors.
Right.
I think maybe if there's a uniqueness to it, is it usually comes, or not usually, it does come with a real, if I said, hey, what does it look like to be a good dad? There's a pretty broad definition of that and what that looks like. Pastors, people come with a certain amount of expectation about what you do, what you say, what you don't say. And in ways that are so sometimes almost comical. I had somebody come up, and this was a very friendly, loving conversation.
Yeah.
And I'm just standing out on the patio greeting people. I had never seen these people before in my life, and they walked up and they said, hey, I said, welcome to church, and I said, I'm the pastor, and they said, well, I'm glad to see you dressed like the way that you're dressed. And I thought, only in this vocation do people have a thought about the clothes that I'm wearing. Nobody else is walking around looking at their clothing, but somehow they had, and again, they were being very funny and kind about it, but, and it's like, and it is easy. So to make it personal, it is easy, to get wrapped up in, I've got to be this thing for people and meet all of these expectations. And you can lose yourself in that. And you can lose yourself in the people pleasing. You can lose yourself in the facade of what you think this has to look like or what the outcomes have to be. And so, long story short, yes, it's an incredible struggle.
Has social media, something obviously Jacob didn't struggle with, but has social media in this day and age influenced and affected identity and keeping up a certain facade, as Daniel said? Whether it's not just teenagers, but adults as well.
I think so. I mean, we talk about regularly, there's my Facebook life and then there's my real life, know? Yeah. And I usually compare my real life to other people's Instagram story. And there's all sorts of filters and edits and retakes. And I'm living in the very real time, frustrated with my real time life while comparing it to the polished and edited life that social media has created, which is unique to our generation. And I think we have that, we do have that comparative pressure. And I think for everybody, I think as Americans, so much of our identity is wrapped up in our vocation. Tell me about yourself. Well, usually we start with what we do for a living.
What do you do? Yep.
And then maybe it's our key relationships. And the thing is, if we failed our job and that's our identity, then we fail. We are a failure.
We are a failure.
If we fail in our parenting, if our kids don't live up to our expectations or others, then we are a failure. If our marriages fail, then we're a failure. But God says when we find our identity in Him, He cannot fail. And he is that anchor. And even when we make a mess of our life, we can still find restoration and hope.
Yeah. I don't know that I'm trying to see your process. That's a great question, Joel. I mean, that was a great question. And I think you can tell when you ask a really great question, we all kind of go, you do it first.
Everyone looks at everyone
I don't
else.
know that I struggle with my identity. I think this job, if you're not very careful, it will modify what you think your identity is. And here's what I mean by that. People come to you with a lot of questions that we're not experts on. Like, hey, what should I do in the real estate market? I'm not a real estate expert. Hey, what should I do with my finances in this area? I'm not a financial advisor. But sometimes you think, oh, I'm on a platform, I'm preaching to people, and they watch you online. You ask the social media question.
Yeah.
We've had people walk in and said, I've been watching you for 3 months. I want to see you in person. And if you're not careful, you will start believing the hype. You will start believing the celebrity. And I think that's the danger in this job. You got to remember you are a broken person with the same problems that every person out there sits with. That's why I tell you I struggle with that. You know, they call you by a title like Pastor Tommy. I'm like, I get what you mean by that. We don't call Electrician John, and we don't call Video Bo. We don't, that's not what we do. And if you're not careful, the position will modify your identity, and you'll believe things about you that are not true. And you'll put yourself as an authority, and all of a sudden you'll get this celebrity idea. I've had people come up and say, hey, can I take a picture with you in the lobby? I'm like, I live on Crystal Springs. I'm just a West Side boy. It's just what I am.
Yeah.
So I know who I am. I just think we have to be careful in this position, not allow this position to change your identity.
That's good. My uncle pastored for a long time, and I remember him telling me one time we were at a restaurant and somebody said, hey, it's Bishop so-and-so. And he goes, no, I hold the office of a bishop.
Right.
I'm just.
Yeah.
And I remember going, that's important anchor.
Yeah.
We had the title, the office of pastor, office of bishop, and it says whoever desires the office desires a good thing. That's not who I am.
I actually make all of our Oakley staff refer to me as the bishop. But yeah, it's good.
I prefer most holy reverend. That's what's on my business card. But but I think it is important. Yeah, you get put with a foursome at the golf course, or you end up on the seat of an airplane, and you wait for a while, conversation's going, and then they go, hey, what do you do for a living? I'm a pastor. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I'm sorry for the way we were talking. Dude, I'm just Daniel.
Yes.
It's okay. You asked me what I did for a living.
And that's why I asked the question. I love hearing I hang out with you all the time.
Yeah.
People may only see you on Sunday at the stage.
Joel knows who we really are.
I know you really But that's why you're real people that are humble enough to admit that you're broken, you don't have it all together. And
But
I think
listen,
that's
it
important.
is the same for everybody else.
Right.
Though.
Exactly.
Everybody else has
is.
got their. Listen, ours is, and it has a title and it's in front of people, but it is the same for every person.
Exactly.
Their identity is their parenting, it's their career, it's their hobby, it's their success. It's their bank account, and if you really get lost in that, I mean, all of a sudden you find out when it doesn't go well, because at some point it doesn't go good.
Right.
At some point you realize, hey, this isn't everything I thought it was going to be. That's when what happens is, oh, I failed, so I must be a failure. I'm, and that's the inevitable outcome when you get lost in some kind of cheap alternative identity.
Yeah.
So Peniel, in this place where the wrestling took place, actually means face of God, or be face to face with God. And this is where we'll land the plane today. Is humility a key ingredient to a God encounter, or experiencing the presence of God? Or are there other key ingredients, or would you say coming face to face with God really is, obviously it would be humbling. Is that a key ingredient for us to come face to face with God?
I think it's an unavoidable condition.
Yeah, that's a great way to say it.
I think if you come face to face with God, humility. I mean, you think anybody that encountered God, that spoke in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and lifted up, and then all of a sudden it's, woe is me, I'm undone. You see even in the New Testament, I am naked, you depart from me. I think if you come face to face with God, it's not that you have to generate humility. It's an unavoidable consequence of coming face to face with God.
You either humble yourself or you will be
You
humbled.
will be humbled.
And I think Scripture teaches that. Peter says, God resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. And I think if we don't humble ourselves before God, we can't experience the grace. I can't until I get to that point and say, God, I'm at the end of my rope. I can't do this. And that's when he steps in. His grace is made sufficient in our weakness. But you see people, you see it throughout Scripture. We've seen it throughout our lives. People who, they're not going to ask for help. They're not going to admit weakness. They are not going to confess that they need help and can't do this. And that pride, you see them gripping the back of the chair, not going to submit and surrender what God's doing in their life. And there's a consequence of that. If I resist the grace of God, that pride is that driver of that.
Yeah.
So I just think this is just a really important discussion and study that we're going to be doing over the next couple of weeks. And I love the story of Jacob and what he experienced. Can we talk a little bit about kind of the other side after this wrestling and what took place after, basically how did God, provide as Jacob comes out? How did God fight for him? And what are some ways that maybe you've seen God fight for you in your area of weakness?
Well, I mean, I think we discover in just a couple of chapters, he meets his brother, and I mean, and this is part of, I think, a lot of that manipulation and identity. We are operating in a whole sense of what I would call unfounded fears. I thought all of this was true, and then you have an experience with God, and all the things you thought were true weren't, and all the things you thought were untrue were actually true.
Yeah.
And what he discovers is his brother didn't want to kill him. His brother longed for a restored relationship, and they were. And I think that is oftentimes the other side of the experience. It doesn't always mean that everything works out, and they lived happily ever after. But it does mean that a lot of times our perspective on the circumstances change, or that God's already gone before us and to handle the situation, and we can take rest and confidence. Rest and confidence in that.
I think Daniel, what you said is really, really, really important and really well spoken. I think you have to come to so here's Jacob, he's manipulated his whole life. He's moved the pieces, and then he wrestles with God. And I think he comes to this realization, if God can wrestle with me, he can wrestle for me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to back away at that point. So I can think of family situations that are really difficult on people, and they want to go make it right. Like, give it some space, and the God that wrestles with you will wrestle for you.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we see what he did with Esau. By the time he shows back up, Esau's like, I'm great.
Yeah, I'm good.
So it's obviously in
Yes.
the unspoken part of the verses that God has gone before him. And he's wrestled with Esau's heart. And he's made that which was very hard on Esau and angry in Esau. By the time he sees him again, I love you. I think you see it in the story of Joseph. I think he's already gone before and he's wrestled. So I think part of our identity and part of our wrestling with God is let him wrestle not only with us, but for us.
Yeah.
So good. Hey, great conversation today. Make sure you don't say anything embarrassing from the stage this week.
It's going to happen. This is the worst thing you could have done.
Hey, thank you so much for listening or watching the podcast today. Make sure, if you're not subscribed, that you check us out on Apple, Spotify, or you can look us up on YouTube, or you can download the Trinity app. Plenty of places to connect with us. Comment below if you want to just share a little bit about how this podcast was a blessing to you, and we will catch you next time.